I am a woman of 78 years. Until last month, I was living on my own, but the effects of a chronic illness made it necessary for me to move in with my daughter and her husband. Dinner on the first day after the move. As the three of us sat around the dining table for the first time in ages, I felt a slight tension, but also a sense of relief. But then, a single sentence changed everything. It would really help us out if you could contribute about $500 a month. You know, for living expenses, since you're here now. The person who said this was my own daughter. Her tone was casual, but I knew instantly she wasn't joking. My son-in-law said nothing, his eyes fixed on the television. You get your pension, right? You can afford it, can't you? I'm grateful for you, Mom. But if we're going to be living together, it's better to have these things settled. I simply smiled and said nothing. But deep inside my heart, something shattered with a deafening crash. That night, I quietly slipped my old bank passbook from the back of the closet, held it for a moment, and then closed it. And the very next morning, I went to the station and bought a single, small ticket. The destination: a remote coastal town in Maine. I told no one my reasons. I simply thought to myself, I wasn't put on this earth to be someone else's wallet. I am no queen. But I believed that it wasn't too late, not even now, to choose my own life again. My name is Evelyn Carter. I am 78 years old. I lost my husband 12 years ago, and since then, I had been living a quiet life alone in my old house in a small town in upstate New York. I worked as a nurse from a young age, became a head nurse at 58, and retired at 68. For the 10 years that followed, I enjoyed a peaceful retirement, tending to my garden, reading, and attending community health workshops. On the same day each month, my daughter would call. The time was always around 7:30 in the evening. Mom, how are you doing? The conversation would begin with her slightly cheerful voice and would invariably end in about 15 minutes. What did you have for dinner tonight? How's your back holding up? Once she had run through her checklist of questions, she would say, Okay, well, I'll call you again next month. Take care of yourself. And just like that, the call would end. It wasn't that she was cold, but there was a sense of a line drawn between us. After hanging up, I would always let out a small sigh and tell myself, well, she's a busy woman. Perhaps I wanted to talk a little longer about the weather, the flowers in my garden, a show I'd watched on television the night before, but before I could bring any of it up, I would hear her, talk to you later. Perhaps I had become someone who was only allowed to peek into my daughter's life from the other end of the telephone line. Don't be a burden. At some point, this phrase had taken root deep within my heart. Whenever I needed to ask for a favor, or even just ask a question, this phrase would gently stop me. I shouldn't bother her with something so trivial. She seems busy right now, I'll wait. Thinking this way had become a kind of politeness I'd acquired over many long years. Still, I believed it. I believed that my daughter wasn't a cold person. She was just overwhelmed by her daily life, by housework, by her job, by her family. So, even if the calls were short, even if our conversations felt more like an interview, I wanted to believe it was all proof that she was thinking of me, Paul. But sometimes, a thought would cross my mind. If I had been able to say, quite simply, I'm lonely, would things have been different? But I couldn't say it. Don't be a burden. That was the quiet pride I held on to, in order to continue being a mother. However, one winter morning, as I was hanging laundry, my foot slipped on the stairs, and I took a nasty fall, leaving me with a bad bruise. I went to the doctor and was told it was nothing serious, but when my daughter heard the news, she called me and said, Mom, it's not safe for you to live alone anymore. Come to New York and live with us. My daughter lived with her husband, a university professor, and their young son. We'll have a room all ready for you. And Jason is so excited to have his grandma here. Hearing those words, I felt a warmth spread through my chest. Perhaps, I thought, the days of living quietly with my family were finally about to begin. I said goodbye to the garden I had so carefully tended with my retirement savings, closed up the house I had lived in for so long, and moved into my daughter's home. It was a room in a condominium in a suburb outside the city. The living room was spacious and filled with sunlight. In my room, a small wooden dresser and a bed with fresh-smelling linens had been prepared for me. But after a few days of living there, I began to feel a sense of unease. The family always ate breakfast before I was up, leaving only cold toast and a glass of milk for me. When I stood in the kitchen, my daughter would say, "Mom, you just relax, really," but her eyes were somehow distant. One day, my grandson came home from school, and as soon as he saw me, he asked, "Grandma, are you giving us $500 this month too?" In that moment, I felt a chill run down my spine. $500? I didn't know what he was talking about and remained silent. My daughter came over and whispered in my ear, "Mom!" With the household budget, I was wondering if we could ask you for just $500 a month for living expenses? I was at a loss for words. I had come here with nothing but a humble, "Thank you for having me." Was I not seen as someone being helped, but as a wallet to be relied upon? That night, lying in bed, tears streamed down my cheeks and would not stop. "Am I even a necessary part of this house?" I whispered into the darkness, but there was no one there to answer. It hadn't even been a week since I had moved. A new home, new air, a new life. Everything was supposed to gradually become familiar. But then, one evening, it happened. Thinking, it must be about time for dinner, I made my way to the living room, only to find the family already eating, the sound of the television filling the room. As I approached the table, no one looked up, and there was no, "Welcome back," or "Please, have a seat." "Oh, you've already started," I said, more to myself than to anyone, and sat down in the empty chair. At that moment, an indescribable feeling of wrongness settled in my chest. Back when my husband was alive, no matter how busy we always said our thank yous for the meal together. But that was a long time ago. Another day, I couldn't find some of my things. I eventually discovered them packed away in cardboard boxes in a small storage closet at the end of the hall. "Oh," I thought, and quietly opened one of the boxes. Inside were my clothes, my books, even the photo albums I cherished. "Sorry, this space is just more convenient to use," my daughter said. I smiled and nodded. "Of course." But inside, a desolate wind seemed to blow through my heart. The next day, I approached my daughter as she was doing the dishes. "Can I help? You can leave the washing up to me." Just then, my son-in-law emerged from the back of the kitchen and said in a soft tone, "No, no, Evelyn. You just rest. Our kitchen is a little complicated, with all the new appliances. It's safer if you don't touch anything." I smiled brightly, but I heard something inside me fall with a thud. Perhaps, in this house, I was a person who was not supposed to do anything. My daughter and her husband weren't malicious. But there was an invisible line drawn somewhere, and I felt I was not being allowed inside it. That feeling grew stronger each day. Even in my own room, I felt like I was in temporary lodging. I hesitated to even put a nail in the wall to hang a photograph. I was beginning to quietly understand that this was not my home. At night, staring up at the ceiling from my bed, I thought of my husband. If he were still alive, would I be feeling this way? Would I be suffering from such a profound sense of not belonging? From that day on, I began to try to be as inconspicuous as possible, to make as little noise as possible, to exist like air. Don't be a burden. The words I had etched into my heart for so long began to cast a large shadow over me once again. But I didn't yet realize that this consideration on my part was, in fact, leading to my own erasure. About 3 weeks had passed when, one Sunday evening at dinner, it happened. The gentle aroma of a pot roast filled the air, and for the first time in a while, we were all gathered around the table together. I was thinking to myself, just being able to share a meal like this is something to be grateful for. After some casual conversation while we ate, my daughter paused for a moment and then spoke. "Mom, your Social Security is about $1,800 a month, right?" The sudden question made me stop, my fork halfway to my mouth. I was a little surprised. "Yes, I suppose it's around that much. Why do you ask?" My daughter kept her eyes on her plate, a faint smile on her face, as she continued in a flat tone. Well, in that case, if you could give us about 500 a month toward expenses, it would just give us a little breathing room, you know? In that instant, it felt as though the air in the room had frozen. My son-in-law, sitting next to me, said nothing. He just gave a small, silent nod. The gesture seemed to confirm something that had already been decided, and a coldness began to spread slowly through my heart. I put down my fork and spoke slowly. Is this something the two of you discussed and decided on? My daughter laughed lightly. Well, yeah. I mean, you're living with us now, Mom. It's only fair that we all share the responsibility, don't you think? Share the responsibility. Those words pierced my chest like a shard of ice. It wasn't about the money. $500. Honestly, taking that from my pension was not a hardship. But it was the way she said it, the emotional distance in her voice, and the entire premise behind the request that wounded me so deeply. I was overcome with the feeling that I hadn't been welcomed as family, but rather processed as a lodger, who was expected to cover a portion of the costs. I managed to form a gentle smile and replied, I see, yes, you're right. We are living together after all. I should certainly do what I can to help. The words felt as if they belonged to someone else. That night, when my daughter smiled and said, Since you're living here too, Mom, we'd like you to chip in for expenses, I almost asked her a question that was burning inside me. I thought responsibility was something you shared? The phrase she had used, share the responsibility, felt so wrong. The word chip in sounded cold, calculated. A long time ago, the word sharing in our family had held such warmth. When my husband fell ill, when my daughter left for college, I gave my support without expecting anything in return. I believed that supporting each other was what it meant to be a family. The monthly checks I sent her, the lunches I packed after working a night shift, my tireless work as a nurse, I never once considered any of it a burden or a responsibility. I truly believed it was all an act of love. And now, in this atmosphere of, well, since Mom is living here, she should contribute her fair share. A price of $500 was being presented. It felt as if a price tag had been attached to my place in the family. I couldn't help but wonder, if I didn't have a pension, would I not be welcome here? Am I seen not as family, but as a boarder? These thoughts spun in my head, leaving a gaping hole in the center of my chest. Hidden behind their smiles was an unconscious boundary, a line drawn in the sand. And standing on the wrong side of that line, I was forced, for the first time, to confront the reality of my own old age. That evening, after dinner was over, I quietly stood up and headed for the kitchen. I'll do the dishes, I said in a small voice, reaching for the sink. Just a few days earlier, my offer would have been met with, Oh, that's all right, Mom. You just go and relax. But this time, it was different. It was because, I had been told, the modern kitchen was just too complicated for me. They had always gently steered me away. But tonight, no one said a word. No one told me to stop. No one even glanced my way. I quietly stood there alone, squeezed some soap onto a sponge, and began to wash the dishes. And that silence, strangely enough, was what pierced my heart. Ah, I thought, so these are no longer the hands of a family member? The feeling wasn't, Mom is helping us out. Instead, it was, we're taking her money now, so of course she should do this much. I couldn't escape the feeling that this unspoken agreement was seeping out. From the corners of the room, thick and suffocating. The only sound was the running water in the otherwise silent kitchen. As I carefully washed each plate, one by one, I asked myself a question in the quiet of my own mind. Is this an act of consideration on my part? Or am I simply being allowed to do this because I am paying for the privilege? I paused and looked down at my own hands, and my fingertips submerged in the warm, soapy water. These were the hands that had cared for hundreds of patients on the hospital floor. These were the hands that had braided my daughter's hair and packed her school lunches every single morning. To think that now they had become hands that were merely permitted to work in exchange for a monthly payment, a sense of emptiness so profound I couldn't put a name to it washed over me. After I had finished washing the very last dish, I gently dried my hands on a dish towel and whispered, in a voice too quiet for anyone else to hear, "I wonder if I'll ever be told thank you again." Later that evening, in the living room, I perched on the very edge of the sofa, my hands resting in my lap, and stared blankly at the television screen. A bright sitcom was playing, filled with a relentless stream of laughter from a canned audience. The room was bathed in the harsh white glare of an overhead LED light, but the light itself felt cold, as if it couldn't penetrate my skin and offer any warmth. Across the room, at the dining table, my daughter and her husband sat side by side, sharing a bowl of chips and laughing. "Did you see that? That's hilarious," I heard my daughter say, her voice mixing with the exaggerated sound effects and applause from the television. I couldn't laugh. I tried to, but the muscles in my cheeks wouldn't move. I couldn't shake the feeling that a part of me, deep inside, was slowly freezing over. This house was filled with laughter, so why did I feel so utterly, completely alone? As if searching for proof of my own existence, I let my eyes wander around the room. My belongings were all packed away in a small storage closet in the corner. My favorite old teapot wasn't sitting on the kitchen counter where I might have put it. Inside the refrigerator, a plastic container of leftovers with my name written on the lid sat untouched. Whose house is this? The question echoed in my mind. Whose house am I in? I was living here with them, and yet I felt like a boarder. Not once since the beginning of the month had anyone asked me, "Mom, are you doing okay?" But other questions always found their way to me. "Did you make the transfer?" "Just a reminder. We'll need the $500 again next month." Those messages were always delivered with perfect clarity. The money was never forgotten. But my feelings, it seemed, were. That was the distinct impression I had. The laughter from the television sounded like it was coming from another world. A world I wasn't a part of. I quietly stood up, intending to go back to my room. Just then, a silent question surfaced from the depths of my heart. Am I just a presence in this house? Or am I a presence they wish wasn't here at all? After dinner, I went back to my room and pulled a small envelope from the back of a drawer. Inside was a portion of the savings I had carefully put aside over many years. For my retirement, which I kept in cash. "If I just take it from here, there won't be any problem," I whispered to myself. But even as I said it, I felt a familiar heat begin to well up behind my eyes. Outside my window, a few lonely stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. It was a quiet night, but my heart was anything but calm. Who had I been working for all these years? At what point did I stop being family and start being a burden? When my husband was still with me, such thoughts would never have even crossed my mind. We would sit at the dinner table together, laughing, sometimes bickering, but all of it, every last bit of it, was wrapped in the warmth of what it meant to have a home. Now, my existence had been reduced to this. A person who hands over money as requested and lives as quietly as possible, so as not to be a bother. But that request for $500? It felt as if it had changed. Something inside me for good, something that could never be undone. Maybe this isn't a place I can call home anymore, I thought, the words settling quietly and certainly in my heart that night. That evening, back in my room, I took out a new envelope from my desk drawer. It was a plain white envelope, crisp and clean, one I had never used before. The moment I placed it in the palm of my hand, I felt a chill spread through my chest. I laid the envelope on the small table and picked up a pen. My hand, I noticed, was trembling slightly. 4 household expenses, 1 month. Slowly, carefully, I wrote out the words, one letter at a time, as if I were preparing an important document for a stranger. I took the $500 from my purse and slid the bills into the envelope. In that moment, I felt something inside me break with a quiet, final snap. This wasn't a gesture of love for my family. This was the price for peace of mind. It was my residency fee, the payment that allowed me to stay here. I couldn't see it any other way. A long time ago, when I used to send money to my daughter in college, I would put it in an envelope just like this. But back then, my heart was warm with the hope that I was helping her, that I was giving her a little support. Tonight, all I could do was murmur to myself, If this is what it takes for them to feel at ease, then so be it. I didn't even know what I should say when I gave it to them. Should I say, "Here you go"? No, that sounded too much like a tenant paying rent. Am I really their mother? Have things really come to this, that I must pay to be acknowledged? I sealed the envelope without writing a name on it and gently placed it on the corner of the dining table. What that envelope truly signified, it was a boundary that couldn't be expressed. In words, a line drawn between the one giving and the one's receiving. But I didn't ask any more questions, because if this would finally put their minds at ease, then that was enough. It was the only way I could convince myself to go on. One day, I had a morning appointment at the doctor's office and returned home a little later than usual. As I walked in, I sensed that something in the air was slightly off. The way the slippers were placed by the door, the angle of the curtains in a living room, and most of all, the small drawer in my bedroom dresser was open, just a crack. That's strange, I thought, but didn't dwell on it. I went to the kitchen to make myself a cup of tea. That's when I noticed the tablet lying on the living room table. The screen was dimly lit, not fully asleep. I leaned in for a closer look and saw it. The browser was still open to the search history, how to get elderly parents to contribute to expenses. The moment I read the words, I gasped. I couldn't move. A sharp pain, like a needle piercing my heart, shot through me. Above that entry were others. Can you legally access a parent's bank account? WAAF. Stevio exponential disputes with live-in elderly parents. The words were too heavy for me to bear. I instinctively went back to my bedroom and checked the drawer again. The stack of my bank statements, which I always kept neatly aligned horizontally, had been shifted. They were now slightly askew. They looked. The realization was immediate and certain, but I couldn't bring myself to confront them. I couldn't accuse them, because, if I were being honest with myself, I had already been suspecting it. That night, after dinner, during that time that was supposed to be for family conversation, I was sitting on the edge of the sofa, staring vacantly at the television. My daughter's voice cut through the noise, her tone deliberately light and casual. "You know, Mom, have you ever thought about, like, a will?" My hand, which was lifting a cup of tea to my lips, froze in midair. "What was that?" I asked, my voice a little tight. He smiled brightly. "Oh, nothing, just a thought. They were just talking about it on a show the other day, and one of the women at my office was saying how much trouble she had with her parents' estate." She spoke as if it were a matter of complete indifference to her. But I knew better. This question wasn't a coincidence. The disturbed bank statements, the internet search history, all of it. It was all connected. I calmly put my cup back down on the saucer and forced a smile. "You're right. I suppose that's something I'll have to think about one of these days." In that moment, I heard something inside of me break, quietly and irrevocably. I had closed the drawer on my financial life, and now I was closing the door to my heart. I had no intention of confronting them with anger or with sadness, because I knew deep down that it wouldn't change anything. Like there was no going back. That night, tucked into my bed, I whispered into the darkness. Perhaps this is not the place where I am meant to spend the rest of my days. I thought back to the day I first agreed to move in with them. After I had fallen down the stairs, my daughter had called me, her voice filled with what I thought was genuine concern. "Mom, I'm just so worried about you being all alone." If I had believed her, I had wanted to believe her, but now that my bank balance had been secretly inspected, my financial value researched online, and the topic of my will casually brought up, I understood. It hadn't been concern. It had been calculation. The next day, I made a quiet decision. It wasn't that I couldn't stay here anymore. It was that I couldn't live. Myself here anymore. I still have the strength to live without being a burden on anyone. If that's the case, then it's time for me to go to find my own place again, on my own 2 feet. That was the night I resolved, in the quiet of my own heart, to make my retreat. I can still hear the words from that evening, as if they were spoken just yesterday. After dinner, as I was clearing the plates from the table, I overheard my daughter talking to her husband. "Well, we are letting her live here. she said in a low voice. It's the least she can do, right? It was just a whisper. I'm sure she never intended for me to hear it. But I heard it. I heard it clearly. Letting her live here. As the words sank in, I felt a coldness spread through me, chilling me to the bone. So that's it, I thought. I'm a guest in this house. By the simple act of taking shelter under their roof, my every action had become a form of payment. No one here saw me as family. No one was willing to accept my feelings or even my presence for what they were. The moment I realized this, I felt, strangely, no anger. There was only a quiet thump somewhere deep in my chest, the sound of something breaking for the last time. Up until now, I had accepted everything without a word of complaint. I had been so careful not to be a burden. But I had reached my limit. If I stay here any longer, I will lose myself completely. I felt as if the person I had worked so hard to become, my own sense of self, was being slowly chipped away piece by piece in this house. And so, I made my decision. I would leave. Not because I was hurt, but because I had to save what was left of myself. W8. I cannot be me if I stay here. That was it. That was the most important reason why I decided to leave that house. On a Monday morning, while the city was still rubbing the sleep from its eyes, I quietly slipped out the front door. I didn't say a word to anyone. I simply opened the kitchen window a little, just as I always did, and took a deep breath. The air, for the first time in a long time, felt light in my lungs. The night before, I had written a letter. I had slipped it silently into the drawer of my daughter's desk. We may not have been able to be a family, but I hope that, as people, we can one day laugh together again. That was how I ended it. The entire letter was short, less than a single page, but I felt as if it contained everything I had left to say. I am writing this now in my journal, sitting at a small ferry terminal, waiting for the boat to a coastal town in Maine. An old acquaintance of mine lives there. She was a patient I cared for many years ago, back when I was still a nurse. She had terminal cancer and was traveling to the mainland for treatment. By chance, I was assigned to her case, and for years after, we kept in touch, sending each other cards every Christmas. A few months ago, she called me out of the blue. I'm running a little bed and breakfast now, and I'm a bit short-staffed, she'd said. If you ever have the time, why don't you come out for a visit? At the time, I thought it was just friendly chatter, but looking back now, I realize it wasn't an offer of an escape. It was the possibility of a place where I could be needed again. I didn't need to pack much to leave. 2 old, worn suitcases. That's all I took. Inside them I had packed my bank book and a small amount of cash, a single jar of the strawberry preserves I'd always loved to make, and 1 framed photograph of my late husband. That was it. I was leaving behind the role of mother, the identity that had defined me for so long. But the woman I was underneath, the person who was just me, Evelyn, I had a feeling she could still find her footing in this world. On the morning of my departure, I stood in my daughter's kitchen and brewed 1 last cup of tea. The familiar, fragrant steam that rose from the mug felt strangely nostalgic, like a scent from a life I had already left behind. As I walked down the hall, I passed the door to her room. I found my hand instinctively reaching out, my palm resting flat against the cool wood. I paused, listening intently, but there was no sound from within. A small voice whispered in the back of my mind. You can still turn back. It's not too late. But I shook my head, a slow, deliberate motion. Even if I did go back, what would I be returning to? There was no place for me there anymore. Not really. Before I walked out the front door for the last time, I placed a small, white envelope on the living room table. On the front, I had written a short note, a final month's contribution from your mother. And underneath that, on a separate slip of paper tucked inside, I had added something more. I may not have had a place in this house, but it seems there is still a place in the world that needs me. I had taken great care with my handwriting, forming each letter with deliberate precision, so there would be no mistaking that the words were mine. As the ferry pulled away from the harbor, I allowed myself a single, fleeting glance back at the shore. The city skyline, receding into the morning mist, looked neither warm nor cold. It was simply there, a silent, shimmering backdrop to the life I was leaving. A gentle breeze lifted my hair from my shoulders, and it felt like a comforting hand on my back, as if the world itself were whispering, "You did the right thing. Well done." I took a long, deep breath, filling my lungs with the salty air, and murmured in a voice so quiet it was almost lost to the wind. This was the right thing to do, wasn't it? The day I arrived in Seacrest Harbor, she was waiting for me right there at the docks. My old friend, Margaret. "Evelyn, you really came. Oh, I'm so happy to see you," she said, wrapping me in a warm embrace. "Now, don't you be a stranger here. There's no need for formalities. Around here, we're all just one big, messy family." The moment I heard those words, I felt a familiar sting behind my eyes, and for a second, I thought I might cry. But I held the tears back, forcing a smile instead as I bowed my head slightly. "Thank you, Margaret. I'll just be staying for a little while, if that's all right." I promised not to be a bother. That night, tucked into a cozy bed in a small, quiet room, I lay awake, staring up at the unfamiliar patterns on the ceiling. From the next room, I could hear the sound of easy laughter drifting through the walls. Someone was moving around in the kitchen, the gentle clatter of pots and pans, a comforting rhythm. Every one of those sounds, so ordinary and simple, felt both nostalgic and brand new to me. They were echoes of a life I had once known, and whispers of a life that was just beginning. I realized then that what I had truly been yearning for all this time wasn't expensive furniture or a room in a sleek, modern condominium. It was something far simpler. It was the feeling of a genuine connection with another person. It was the quiet reassurance that it was okay for me to simply exist, to just be there. That's all a person really needs. With just that, you can find the strength to truly live. I believe that with all my heart. And that's why I knew this wasn't an escape. This was a beginning. The first time I breathed in the air of this island town, I couldn't help but take another deep, greedy gulp. A breeze, carrying the briny scent of the low tide mixed with the sweet, familiar smell of wild grass, gently brushed against my cheek. When I slid open the front door of Margaret's little bed and breakfast, I wasn't greeted by a welcoming smile or a grand, impressive room. What met me instead was the faint, homey scent of old, sun-warmed wood floors and the gentle heat of a sunbeam slanting across the worn rug. I quietly set down my bags and sat at a small, low table in the corner of the room. The soft hum and eventual click of the electric kettle boiling water sounded strangely pleasant, a peaceful punctuation to the silence. Here, I could make myself a cup of tea without worrying about being in someone's way. Here, I could make myself a simple sandwich for lunch, seasoned just the way I liked it, without having to glance up and read the expression on someone else's face. I never imagined that such small, simple freedoms could feel so profound, that they could settle so deeply into my heart. No tears came. There was no sadness left to cry. Instead, I felt a quiet, powerful hum deep in my chest. It was the feeling of being alive. Perhaps, in this place, I could learn to live again, not as a mother or a guest, but simply as a person. And that thought, more than anything else, was my salvation. That morning, like all the mornings that had followed my arrival, the breeze blowing in from the ocean was gentle, carrying with it a scent that felt like a memory from a long time ago. I walked out into the small garden behind the house, my bare feet cool on the damp earth. I plucked a few ripe cucumbers from the vine, their skins still dewy and cool, and placed them carefully in my basket. With these, my preparations for breakfast were complete. Just then, I felt a vibration in my pocket. I pulled out my cell phone and glanced at the screen. The call log was a long list of missed calls, all from the same number, all under the same name, my daughter. It had been a week already. On the day I left, I hadn't said a word to anyone. I had left only the letter and the envelope on the kitchen counter. I'd assumed they would notice my absence quickly, of course, but I never imagined I would receive so many frantic calls. I pressed a button and listened to the latest voicemail. "Mom, where are you? I'm so worried I can't sleep." Hearing the panic in her voice brought a familiar ache to my chest, a tightness that made it hard to breathe. I couldn't bring myself to answer her, not yet. But later that afternoon, I stood in the middle of a small vegetable patch, the brilliant blue sea stretching out behind me, the warm sun soft on my forehead. I asked Margaret to take a picture of me with her phone. In it, I was smiling, a genuine, unforced smile. I sent the photo to my daughter. I added only 5 words: "I am living well, and I am safe." A few moments later, a reply came through. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I was only thinking about myself, about the money." As I read her text, I let out a long, slow breath I didn't realize I had been holding. In a way, just hearing those words, just seeing them written out, was enough. Perhaps that was all the closure I needed. But there was one more thing I had to say. I typed out another short message. "It's okay. Your mother is fine. But please, I hope you teach your own son this one day. A person can't live on financial support alone. What truly matters is kindness and warmth." As my thumbs tapped out the words, my mind drifted back to a time when my daughter was just a little girl. I remembered the nights she had a fever, how I held her small, hot body in my arms for hours, rocking her until she finally fell into a restless sleep. I remembered the early mornings, my own eyes heavy with fatigue, as I carefully packed her lunch for a school field trip, wanting everything to be perfect. I remembered the feel of her too heavy backpack when I'd lifted onto my own shoulders to give her a break on the walk home. Back then, I never once expected anything in return. I never thought of my actions as a sacrifice or a burden. It was simply what a mother did. It was an act of love. But now, one phrase echoed in my mind, the words she had whispered to her husband. Words I was never meant to hear. "Well, we are letting her live here." The difference was vast. I wanted my daughter to understand that you don't let someone live with you. You live together. You share a life, not just a roof. That night, I sat on the porch under the soft glow of the moon and looked up at the sky, the same stars that my daughter and I used to count together when she was a child were still there, twinkling just as brightly as they always had. "You know, people live on love," I whispered into the quiet night. Even if no one else could hear it, the words were true. It was the truest thing I knew. The next morning, I went to the small post office in town and mailed a package to my daughter. Inside, I had packed a jar of my homemade strawberry preserves and a postcard with a picture of the rocky Maine coastline. And I included one more note. Part of growing up is learning how to be the one who gives. And that doesn't just mean money. It means giving your time, your words, and your heart. That is how people truly connect with one another. All I had ever wanted was to be called Mom, and to feel the love that came with that word. And maybe, if I'm being honest, what I truly longed for was to once again have a place where a family would greet me with a smiling, "Welcome home." But even without that now, I am all right. Here, with the sky and the sea and the good, dark earth of this island for company, I am living, quietly, and with a strength I had forgotten I possessed. I now have a part-time job at a small preschool here in Seacrest Harbor, teaching the children how to cook. It's nothing complicated. I just show them how to chop soft vegetables with a safety knife, how to form rice into little balls with their small hands, and how to make a simple, flavorful broth for soup. I am just passing along the taste of life, in the simplest way I know how. One of the teachers told me the other day, "The children just love your cooking. They say it tastes like their grandma's." That one sentence filled my heart to the brim. To be needed by someone. To be able to use my own 2 hands for the benefit of others. I understand now just how much that can nourish a person's soul. In the afternoons, I make myself a cup of tea and sit out on the porch. The time I spend there, feeling the sea breeze on my face while I watch the calm ocean, has become my daily reward. Sometimes, I write letters to old friends. The simple story of my new life here flows from the tip of my pen. For the first few days, the mornings felt too quiet, and I confess I felt a pang of loneliness. The only sounds were the bird song and the gentle rhythm of the waves. After being so accustomed to the constant noise of the city, it felt as if time itself had stopped. But a strange thing happened. I found that these days, where nothing was expected of me, began to feel incredibly light. There was no one's mood to constantly monitor, no unappreciated help to exhaust myself with. Here, there was only peace. In the morning, I make myself a bowl of oatmeal. At midday, I work in the garden alongside some of the local townspeople. In the late afternoon, I have my simple cooking class with the children. The people on the island call me Miss Evelyn and always greet me with a smile. "You know, you remind me of a teacher I had when I was little," one woman told me. "This soup, it tastes like home," another said. These small, kind words have saved me more times than they will ever know. I've even grown to love the evenings when I sit alone, sipping my tea. There is no calendar looming over me, no schedule to keep. I can just sit quietly and listen to my own heart. The days I spent in that house were undeniably difficult, but looking back now, I can see that they were what led me here, to this place. Perhaps retirement isn't about serving others until you can no longer stand. Perhaps it's a time to finally wrap your own arms around yourself and hold on tight. And the most wonderful thing of all was a letter that arrived one day from my grandson, Jason. Written in a child's unsteady hand were the words, "Grandma, I miss you." The tears wouldn't stop falling. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were warm tears, shed in the moment I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was still loved. One day, another letter came. Tucked inside was a drawing from Jason. It showed a big, smiling sun, a bright blue ocean, and two small figures holding hands. Below it, he had written, "Grandma, I want to go to the beach with you." The moment I saw those simple, earnest words, the tears came again. A pure, straightforward wish, written by a small, loving hand. I don't need a big house or an impressive title anymore. I no longer have any desire to be seen as the ideal mother or a good grandmother. I only need one person. Just one person who wants to be with me. If I have that, it is more than enough. I am living now, quietly and with a sense of dignity I thought I had lost. It's a freedom I've only discovered in my later years. In this place, I feel like I have finally found myself again. And so, today, like yesterday, I will make simple sandwiches with the children. "Miss Evelyn, what kind of soup are we having today?" "Today, we're having a nice vegetable soup with some sweet corn from the island." These small conversations are my treasure. I haven't won any great victory. I haven't defeated anyone. But now, as I sit here feeling the island breeze, I can feel a tight knot deep inside my chest, finally, gently coming undone. Everything that happened in that house, my daughter's words, the moment I was told that paying was the least I could do, it has all become a part of me. I haven't forgiven it. I haven't forgotten it. But the time I have left is far too precious, and far too short, to spend it living with resentment. My life here isn't one that anyone would praise. There is nothing luxurious about it, nothing to show off to others. But there are children who tell me the food I make with my own hands is delicious. And there are people who listen to my stories and say, "Tell me another one." I have learned that this is all a person needs to begin again. Even when you are old, you can still create a place for yourself. Even if no one gives it to you, you can light that small lamp for yourself. I don't have to be the convenient one for the family anymore. I don't even have to be needed by someone. I just want to live in a place where I, myself, can cherish the person I am. And if the woman I was in that house could meet the woman I am now, I know we would gently take each other's hands and smile. And we would say, "We made it. We're okay." As we get older, there is a part of us that tries to shrink, to become smaller, so as not to be a bother to anyone. I'm living in their house after all. I used to tell myself, and I endured so much because of it. But growing older does not make you an afterthought or a burden in someone else's life. Sometimes, the loudest cry for help is to quietly walk away. Right now, I have almost no material possessions, but I am also not bound by anything. To make my own tea, to listen to the sound of someone's laughter, to look out at the ocean and whisper, Good job today in these small moments. I feel truly, profoundly alive. So please, if you can, take a moment to listen to the silent voices of the people in your life. Try to hear the words they cannot say. Have you ever been in your own home, under the same roof as your family, and felt as if you had no place to belong? Has your worth ever been measured by your pension, or by the rent and food you could contribute? If you have ever had an experience like that, please share it with us in the comments. Tell us, I don't need your assistance, I just need your respect. If this story has made you think about the way you interact with your own mother or grandmother, please consider sharing it. Share it before she feels she has no choice but to leave without a word. And please, consider subscribing to our channel. We will continue to bring you stories that make you want to pick up the phone and call someone you love.